Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the organizer to inviting me to come here to speak at this exciting event on the future of financial services in the EA. I'm Harald Francke Lund, the CEO of CICERO Green, a commercial entity established in 2018 by the globally renowned climate research institute, CICERO. Our mission is to shift the financial markets towards greener investments and improved transparency without creating undue transaction costs for the financial sector. And it's great to me to be here exactly now because the timing is perfect. We have been operating in a market that hasn't been regulated so far. So it's really exciting times for us. How will it be to be regulated? Come back to that a little bit afterwards, but later in my presentation. We have been championing second opinions in the global green bond market since its inception and remain the largest external reviewer by volume globally. We have worked with more than 330 unique clients around the globe. You see some of the names here on the slide. Mainly focusing on green bonds, but also broader green finance frameworks. We have started doing green equity. We also do sustainable finance and sustainability-linked products, as well as providing sector briefs and reporting reviews for government entities and corporates and financial institutions to facilitate the green transition and to communicate to the financial sector. We provided the first second opinion in the market for the World Bank back in 2008. We did the first green bond for a city, Gothenburg, and the first corporate bond for Vasakronen, both in 2013. Quite some years back, and also the first green sukuk, which is an Islamic bond for an energy company in Malaysia. We also nudged both the Oslo Stock Exchange to become the first stock exchange globally with a separate green bond listing in 2015, and last year Nasdaq to introduce a designation list for green equities, which they launched in June last year. Green finance is about reducing emission and prepare for future severe consequences of climate change. Changes that are already happening. Last year, it was all about flooding in Europe. This year, we have had drought. And without immediate and significant emission reductions across all sectors, limiting global warming to well below 2 degrees in alignment with the Paris Agreement goals will not be possible. Recent events have impacted global emission trends. The world saw a significant decrease in emissions due to the COVID-19 pandemic and related travel bans, lockdowns, and reduced industrial activities, resulting in a drop in daily global emissions of 17% in April 2020. However, global CO2 emissions rebounded by almost 5% in 2021 and are expected to reach a new record high in 2022. According to Bloomberg, finance of fossil fuels increased by 15% the first 8 months of this year. And we know that investment in fossil fuels need to decline and deforestation need to stop if we are to succeed. And in particular focus we should have on projects that are locking in emissions in the longer term. Sustainable bond issuance broke the 1 trillion mark in 2021, following a strong trend from 2020. While January 2022 volumes were record high, the war in Ukraine, energy prices, and inflation have impacted bond dynamics negatively in 2022. But this development so far is seen as temporary. Investors care about environmental risks and opportunities. Climate risk has become a clear financial risk. Global losses associated with extreme weather have doubled in last decade. Uninsured losses are more than twice as large as insured. And in particular, some countries that are important for the supply chain, only a fraction is insured. Countries like Bangladesh, etc. And we know that it's been a long-term trend that investors are divesting from unsustainable projects. Green solutions are scalable and represent investment opportunities for investors. And when we see that emissions continue to grow and researchers continue to say, to warn against the consequences, the only rational reactions from investors is to better understand what this means for them. This is showing the market, and if you look at, go back to 2016, that was when China entered the green bond market, and they only entered the market they waited until they had their own taxonomy, while they had regulated the market. At that time in 2016, it was almost equal share between China, Europe, and the US. While we have seen now, in particular the last year, that the majority is now more than 50% comes from Europe. And if you look at the Nordic region, in particular Sweden has been leading actors in early movers in this market. Last year, 1/3 of the bond market in the Nordics was green, compared to a little bit less than 1/5 of the European market overall. Most of the proceeds are allocated to green buildings, renewable energy, and clean transportation. That has been quite stable over the years, but we see now that there is more diversification, and that is, of course, extremely important because we know that climate change is impacting all sectors and all regions. So we need to encourage all the sectors to participate in this transition. And as I said, even now we start to regulate this market, but this market has been there for a while. 1/3 of the bond market is green. So we have actually now lately started to see more critical voices. We hear more often the word is green financing and greenwashing. This is a discussion we welcome. We think it's more important to raise the question. And we shouldn't be afraid of having that discussion. But they go over kind of, there are different elements in this discussion. Over the summer, we saw a front page in The Economist focusing on E, S, and G, environmental, social, and governance as a concept, and where the argument was that is it actually possible to say something meaningful if you add all these concepts together? And they kind of asked for the most important is to get the emission number. And that is what we really need. Some really timely points, but also don't agree with everything that was written. And in particular, it's when it comes to emission data, supply chain emission data is still very tricky to get. We don't have a proper methodology, and it's quite difficult to collect the scope 3 emissions. Since this market is growing, we definitely need regulations, but it's also important to continue to motivate the market itself to a race to the top. And it's important we need to build investor demand for high quality information on green climate risks. This has been the real kind of driver in this market so far, the interest from investors themselves. So hopefully by regulating this market, we are not shifting kind of the innovation part to the regulators. Hopefully the market will still be able to innovate. I think that's extremely important. And then we also see there has been kind of discussions about the taxonomy, a long discussion on whether to include natural gas and nuclear. Now the NGOs and the whole aim of the taxonomy was to avoid the greenwashing. And now the NGOs have gone to court and claiming that the Commission is greenwashing with this regulation. And we also have started kind of some financial authorities looking into greenwashing claims, more based on existing regulation. So interesting developments. And in this market, of course, the key question has always been, what is green? What could qualify for being green? Is it green to do energy efficiency in a coal power plant? Is it green to do a energy efficient building in an airport? Is it green to halve emissions from an oil tanker from an existing oil field? All of these cases are kind of cases from the green bond market. And green bonds are just normal bonds. Only difference is that they are green. To issue a green bond today, you need to kind of follow the green bond principles, or you're expected to follow the international green bond principles. They are voluntary principles agreed by all major players in the market. No formal regulations and nor liability thus far. And it's basically, it's up to the, since these are voluntary and there is no kind of clear definition on what green is in this market, it's up to investors to decide whether they want to buy or not, or whether they think it's green enough. Then efforts continue to standardize expectation for and maintain the integrity of green financial markets through taxonomies. A green financing classification system have been introduced in the European Union, I just mentioned. We also have, as I said, China, Japan, Malaysia, and Mongolia, while at least 19 additional countries are considered or in the process of developing green taxonomies. Many of these efforts may enhance clarity and credibility in green financial markets. At the same time, they may also create significant discrepancies among different jurisdictions and be subject to political influence that may not always align with best available science or global goals, creating potential for controversy or confusion. Debates over the inclusion of natural gas and nuclear power in the EU taxonomy, for instance, demonstrate this challenge and point to a market with varying regional taxonomies rather than a global standard. And it's a risk that if green definitions becomes too strict and bureaucratic, that the standard could be less relevant. And we also have, in this market, we have ESG data providers that try to communicate to investor how green a company is. And according to research, correlation among prominent agencies, ESG rating agencies, is on average 0.61. By comparison, credit ratings from Moody's and S&P are correlated at 0.92. And this is, of course, because credit ratings has existed for much longer than ESG ratings. But this makes it difficult for investors to interpret these results. And research shows that measurement contributes to 56% divergence, scope of the methodology, 38%, and how they weight the different elements, 6%. So and this was also some of the criticism from in the Economist article. And so it just showcases how important it is for investors to actually understand the methodologies, to actually kind of how much weight they can put in on the results. Then another player here that has been instrumental, I mentioned it, it's the stock exchanges, and especially for the green bond market. It was really important that in order to be listed as a green bond, you had to have an external review. And I think that has been very important for the market, that they took this decision early on. And also now it's a lot of initiatives run by the stock exchanges where they want to kind of facilitate transparency in this market by developing data tools and sharing data in order to make it more easy to investors to access information. So it's in this context where we have tried to bridge the communication between climate research and the investor community. We are not financial advisors. But we know that we will not succeed with the green transition without the financial sector pricing climate risk properly. And creating a common language so that investors can engage directly with the companies on the most important issues has been key. And early on in this market, we know that the success factor here is to kind of integrate sustainability in financial decisions. We see that with some of the regulation in the EU. We're not talking about non-financial disclosure directive anymore. We are talking about corporate sustainability reporting directive. And early on, when we worked with clients, we saw that even inside the organizations, that the CFOs in the organization has never spoken to the sustainability people in the organization. So they met for the first time when we had a call with them to ask questions, to prepare them for road shows, etc., to meet the investors. That's quite interesting, but the first extremely important, the first very important step in order to succeed with integration on and talk about real sustainability. And I think this is one of the reasons why we have been quite successful in this market. It's the development of our Shades of Green methodology that we developed early on in 2015. It reflects the extent to which investments and operation contribute to the transition to a low carbon and climate resilient future and their exposure to climate risk. Our methodology provides a nuanced yet digestible assessment for investors by acknowledging that greenness is not binary. Investments in projects of all shades of green are necessary to successfully achieve the Paris Agreement. And the shades range from dark green to red. And the dark green, we allocated those projects that if we fast forward to 2050 and we have succeeded with the transition, all the projects that you see around, those are the dark green. But then we also know that we need investments in transition activities. So that will be in particular the light and the medium green. And then the red would be more the activities that we need to stop. And the yellow is more kind of business as usual. Then so far, green bonds is about user proceeds. It's about kind of borrowing money to projects, concrete projects. We see now whether that is because the discussions and the taxonomy and its more detailed focus on the user proceeds has shifted more towards a focus on the companies, which is of course a good development in the sense that that's what we really need. We need the companies to transition as a whole and not only part of the portfolio. So we see a growth in a new product called sustainability-linked bonds, and that's more result-based financing that are linked to the performance of the whole company. And we also, as I said, the interest of a separate listing for companies, green equities. Nasdaq was the first last year. We also see that the focus, there has been a lot of focus on forward-looking statements, targets that the companies have in order to transition. And since Glasgow last year, we now have 5,000 companies that support the UN's Race to Zero campaign. But of course, it's easy to commit to what you're going to do in a 2050 perspective. It's more tricky to say what you're going to do in the shorter term. So here it's also really important if investors are going to rely on these targets, that they need to kind of better understand how meaningful these commitments are and how they relate to climate science and how they compare. And as one of our kind of famous researchers has said, net zero is rock solid science, but easy for PR departments to spin. And then this is the kind of what green finance is about. It's about highlighting the green supply chains for investors. What is great with working as an external reviewer in this market is that you're able to work with all sectors in all regions and to highlight the interactions between the sectors. I think that is extremely important. And just to showcase One example, a couple of examples, especially in real estate, you can't talk about kind of building new buildings, only focusing on energy efficiency. You also have to take into account the construction phase and the material use. Another example, in aquaculture, you can't talk about sustainable aquaculture if the feed comes is related to deforestation. And also, but now we actually see a trend, and I think Hydro was quite clear about this over the summer, that they now get better paid for their low emission aluminium, which is a super good signal to the market, because aluminium, the product itself is the same. It's just that the market is willing to pay more because it's produced with less emissions. We work with car producers, so probably the electric car producers are demanding low emission aluminium in order to produce electric cars. It matters in a kind of a life cycle perspective. And also how the electric cars are transported to the customers matter. We have worked with shipping companies like Wallenius Wilhelmsen that now really want to kind of showcase to investors that they're not only a shipping company, but they ship cars, both electric cars and fossil fuel cars, and report on the share, which is also very interesting to kind of tell investors how important they also are in the whole kind of in the 2050 solutions. At the same time, of course, reducing emissions from the operations. Then, of course, now at the time, right now, the EU classified green bond, the standard, is under negotiations. The aim is to agree on the standard before Christmas. And it is, for us, of course, we have a long list of being the first in the market. We would really like to be the first in issuing a EU green bond. That, of course, requires that we can trust the EEA agreement and kind of the implementation of the agreement for us. So we are really kind of in that regulation. It is we need to have be approved by the authorities. For the EU companies. It's about the ESMA regulation. And for us, it remains to see how that system will work, and we hope that there will be no time gap in the implementation. Thank you.